This is the crown jewel, Mr. Good as Gold. This is Connor Hopkins.
I am Eric S. Knight.
And I'm a league champion.
And we are the chosen prodigal sons, and this is the Shotgun Wrestling Radio podcast.
What's up, everybody? It's Leon King here, of course, the baddest of the baddest, and you are now listening to Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
This is Gavin Parker, and you're listening to Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
This is the mechanic Big Beasley, and you are listening to Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
This is your deathmatch daddy Bo guy, and you're watching Shotgun Wrestling Radio.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Shotgun Wrestling Radio. I'm your host, Zach Takis. Tonight, we are heading to the road to the next Central Empire Wrestling show, which is Saturday, May the 4th. We're just about 2 weeks away here, and my guest at this time made quite a debut for Central Empire Wrestling at our last show, and left his mark made, and it's got a very exciting matchup set up for the next Central Empire Wrestling show that we're headed towards. And I'm very excited to get this person on the program to talk to him. So at this time, let me introduce to you the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend that is Augustus Draven. Sir, welcome to the program.
Oh, hello. Pleasure to be here.
So again, man, it's you made quite the debut impression at the last Central Empire Wrestling show there in Oskaloosa. Oskaloosa has such a great fan base for Central Empire Wrestling, and I know that was your first debut for Central Empire Wrestling. So let's kind of talk right there. What was that like for you to finally get in front of that Oskaloosa crowd?
Oh, I had a really good time. Yeah, it was a good venue. People were all loud and enthusiastic. It was a good ring, good lighting, good opponent. Everyone backstage was very kind and welcoming, and I have nothing but positive things to say about my experience there.
Now, before we kind of get more into your time with Central Empire Wrestling, I always have to ask this because everybody's story is different. And again, you guys have all taken a different path in professional wrestling. What led you to want to become a professional wrestler?
Oh, well, I've always loved wrestling, and I started watching it when I was I think just after my 7th birthday is when I started watching it, and something I always loved, and I was going to do it. I wanted to kind of do it straight out of high school, but didn't. Kind of life kind of intervenes at times, and took a different path, and never really was able to. I never really had a passion for what I was doing in life, even though I was, especially right before I started my wrestling training, I was reasonably financially successful. I was living a very comfortable life, but was not happy. And once I got trained to wrestle, started wrestling, right? That's all the best years of my life have been since I trained to become a pro wrestler. And being booked or being a professional wrestler is all the best years of my life, even though it's very much like anyone who would see my bank account now compared to before I became a pro wrestler would think I am insane. But everyone has to walk their own path, and I'm someone who was not happy with financial security and mental emotional unhappiness. I much prefer the way I have things now as how it was then, and it's important for everyone to follow their own path and do what they love, at least to some degree. Not everyone has to do it the way I do it or have done it. Everyone makes mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes as well, but I certainly use my life as a tale for people that you need to do what you love, at least in some degree, right? We all have to make a living and whatnot, but pro wrestling for me represents to me, what I love most for my entire life. I never grew out of it. When I hit puberty, I didn't stop liking pro wrestling. When I hit adulthood, I didn't stop loving professional wrestling. It's one of the few constants from the time I was a child through now. So it's just something I always wanted to do. And I made a promise to someone that I would do it, even though I was a little older. I'm older than your average pro wrestler, especially at this level. But I love it. So for me, it's very much a lifelong passion that I'm very happy and grateful to be partaking in, even at the kind of entry level of independent pro wrestling.
Now, when you were finally kind of narrowing down the number of schools that you would thought about going to, because we're blessed here in the Midwest scene to have actually quite a few really good, reputable, training schools to choose from here if you want to choose to be a professional wrestler. What led you to I know you're, if I'm not mistaken, a Black and Brave graduate. So what led you over to those guys over there? And that, I mean, obviously the name speaks for itself, but what led you to them?
Well, I'm one of the few graduates who ever saw the Black and the Brave as a tag team, so I knew that name. So if someone just hears the Black and the Brave, they might not immediately associate it with Seth Rollins. But I knew Tyler Black. Like, no one's paid more money as a graduate than me to have seen Tyler Black wrestle, to have seen Merrick Brave wrestle, to have seen Shane Hollister wrestle, right? So I knew that name. So once I heard that was a name, I realized, oh my gosh, Seth Rollins has a wrestling school. And so then that's just that's the best. It's a one of a kind thing, right? For an active top level performer, of the highest level of the industry, to actively be training people. I don't think that's ever really happened. I know people who have achieved his level of success have opened up schools in retirement, right? But comparing Seth Rollins to any other wrestling trainer, I think is at best disingenuous, and at worst is carny. So it was very much, I could have been trained 15 minutes from where I lived by someone I never heard of, who trained no one I ever heard of, or I could come get trained by someone who had left the main event of a WrestleMania at that time as a WWE champion. So for me, it just wasn't even a question. And also, I didn't have a 2-year wait list, right? So I think the average wait time now is 2 years, right? And I got in a couple months, but that's because I was very much trying to get in. I was able to pay all in advance and whatnot. But yeah, so it wasn't, I mean, once I found out that that was a thing, it wasn't really a choice. It was just, can I get in? Can I get in? If I could get in, then yes, right? And then if you have the money, right? Like, if you have the money and you can wait, it's not even really a question, unless you want to go get trained by Booker T, right? But everything else is very much just going to be getting trained by an indie guy. God bless them. But it's a whole different ball of wax. It's a whole different thing. So for me, it wasn't even a question. The only question is, do you have the money and do you have the ability to wait? That's the only difference. It's leagues above. It's like comparing the NFL to the UFL. You know what I mean? Or, the arena leagues to the National Football League, Black and Brave to everything else, right? Because it's one thing for some guy who's worked some indies in one state, in one part of the country, to tell you this is what to do and why. And it's one thing for someone who has main evented multiple WrestleManias to tell you what to do and why, right? And he may not do all the legwork, right? But he comes in, right? You don't need Seth Rollins to teach you how to do a flat back bump, right? And anyone can do that, and anyone does do that, right? And then they just start practicing moves. Anyone can learn to bump and roll, and then just practice a bunch of moves on a crash pad with a dummy, right? And from what I found in my time out there, that does describe the bulk of wrestling training, right? So here it's very much not that, right? Physical fitness, ring psychology, working matches, working spots, promo day, character development are all put in there. And then you have to then demonstrate competency in front of one of the most externally successful professional wrestling sports entertainment performers of all time, and certainly of the last 25 years, right? So it's a different animal. It really is.
Now, what was it like for you that first day? Again, you got all signed up, you're ready to go. First day of training. What was that experience like for you? Go back to that time you're walking in, you do your warm ups, you finally get to take your first flat back bump. What was that feeling like for you?
Well, for day 0 is a conditioning test. You don't start bumping until, like, I guess the first week, but the first week is just a conditioning test. And then week 2 is when you might bump, depending on if you can get through rolls. But day 1 is a conditioning test, which is called day 0. and people will drop on that, right? So you get in there, you sign your waiver, you give them your sports physical, and then they start running you through hours of intense physical training, right? And I asked in advance what the training might be like, and they didn't give me any specifics, but they told me CrossFit would be a part of it. So I took some CrossFit before I got to the camp. So that helped to get me in good cardiovascular shape, or decent cardiovascular shape. There were people there that were running circles around me, literally. But then there were also people who quit. There were 2 people who quit the conditioning test on the spot. And the school itself averages a 50% drop rate from the beginning of the class to the end of the class. Yeah. They spell it all out in plain language on the website, but you can tell people all day what it is. People are just going to show up thinking that it's fantasy rock and roll camp with Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch, which it very much is not. Anyone who can hear my voice, please don't show up to the Black and the Brave thinking that it's some fantasy wrestling camp with Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch. It is not. You are showing up to work. And the people who think that they're going to show up and Seth Rollins is going to become their best friend, give him a kiss on the lips and a WWE contract, those are the ones who quit quick, or you watch their spirit break, right? It's not a shortcut. And it's the most, if you have anyone who hasn't done military training or Division I athletic training, it is the most physically intense, demanding thing they've ever done in their life, right? The only people who aren't completely taken aback by it are people who have had military training, which means they went through basic training, or Division I college athletic training, because we've had D2 and D3 athletes come through and not be able to hang, or it's as intense or more intense than they have ever had to deal with up to that point. All right. So I remember I remember the conditioning test, kind of being a cheerleader for people, just trying to see, I know that we want leaders. I know he wanted leaders. He assumed a leadership role as he was coming up. And I thought that might reflect well upon me if I was trying to help people out, especially people who were struggling. But I remember, silently, very quietly, like to myself, begging for mercy, right, towards the end. But I mean, I wasn't going to quit, right? Like, so, I know at least one person quit on the conditioning test, and we had a 50% drop in my class. But yeah, I just remember, I showed up to the bunkhouse like 3-4 hours before the test. And, I went, I ate, I hydrated, I changed, and then I went there and I did it, and so what I probably remember the most is probably the burpees, and then kind of helping, kind of cheering people on. And I remember the people who quit. And then I kind of remember the Q&A after the conditioning test, where you're allowed to ask your fan questions, right? Get your fan questions out of the way. Because after that, it depends if he's there or not. He was there for that one. They like to have you just kind of get your fan questions out of the way ahead of time, because you're showing up to be a performer, not to be just a fan, right? We're always fans, but for the time you're there, it's better if you're kind of able to take off. There's a difference between being a creator and being a consumer, right? And they kind of want you to adopt the mindset of a creator or a producer, right, rather than just a consumer. So, yeah, the burpees, the people quitting, and then kind of getting my fan questions out of the way. That's what I remember most about my conditioning test.
Now, when you finally passed your conditioning test, you got through that first week, and you guys finally started to do the in-ring work. Did you feel like the in-ring work, like the bumps and everything, came natural to you, or was it more surprising to you?
Came more naturally to me, right? So I was a 3-sport athlete with a theater background, all in the purpose, and my college degree, my bachelor's degree, is in media communications, all with the mindset of this will help me in pro wrestling someday. And then having wrestling matches in my family room for my entire childhood, right? Doing rolls and doing bumps, very much amateur, untrained, but it's just one of those things where, especially since I got older, I was watching it differently. So, there's everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses. There are certain things I only had to be told to do once, right? And then certain things I didn't get, and I had to keep showing up to open ring and doing them, so I wasn't holding the class back. But no, it just especially the rolls, that didn't surprise me. The bumps, and it hurts, and they make you do a lot of them on purpose, right? So that kind of was it was a surprise at first, but then you just get used to it, which is the purpose of it, right? To get mentally and physically calloused to the idea and the physical bump itself.
Now, when you were growing up, obviously you said you were a fan growing up. Who were some of the guys that you loved watching? Kind of some of those guys that even today you still love to go back and just watching, kind of just that you really gravitated towards.
Well, my three favorite wrestlers of all time are Bret Hart, AJ Styles, and CM Punk. Right? If you kind of expand that out to a top 10 list or 10 to 15 list, throw in Kurt Angle, Rob Van Dam, Raven, Scott Hall, Sting, Samoa Joe. The Great Muda is definitely in there as well. So, and then I was someone who was able to watch the Attitude Era live, so that was just, people try to retcon the Attitude Era as not being as good as people remember it. But when people are talking about it, they're not talking about the work rate outside of the cruiserweight division in WCW. Just those larger than life figures, right? Seeing Crow, Sting, all, that's just stuff that always just blew me away. But then also people like Ultimo Dragon, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, some more of my all-time favorites. So a combination of workers, the characters, right? Like those.
And again, you mentioned Bret being one of your favorites. I tell everybody, Bret for me is as well. I would put him on my Mount Rushmore. And I got to get it out there on the table. Goldberg sucks, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, if Bret Hart's my favorite wrestler of all time, right? Like, yeah, but I mean, that's another one, right? Where it's, if you lived through Goldberg's initial WCW run, no one was saying Goldberg was a great wrestler, right? It's the experience. It's something that is very much lost on people who are hyper focused and have made liking the between the ropes work rate their prime personality trait, right? And have attached their ego to the concept of being a fan of work rate. No one back then cared for Goldberg's work rate. It was an experience. It was a character thing. And outside the match he had with DDP at 1998, right, didn't have many great matches, right? But yes, very much. I would much prefer if Bret Hart didn't have to retire, that he took a straight kick to the head, right?
Yeah. Well, I kind of try to tell people that too. I'm like, unless you, like us, didn't experience the Goldberg phenomenon as it was happening, you don't get where people like us are coming from. Like, again, you said work rate, it was what it was, but just in that time, it was awesome to watch him go out there for 60 seconds and dominate somebody and continue that whole undefeated streak that they had built up. Me living here in Cedar Rapids, Bischoff ran here all the time. Like, I was lucky enough to be able to go to a Nitro and a Thunder and Clash of Champions at one point, and I think it was one of the Thunder episode they had that Goldberg was actually here, so I actually got to experience that Goldberg phenomenon live, even if it was just a Thunder taping. But it was still one of the coolest things to experience from a live perspective.
Oh yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, WCW liked Iowa. The NWO sold out pay-per-view was in Des Moines, I believe.
No, that was here in Cedar Rapids. I think that was the only event that I didn't go to that was WCW related. And the years later that I've watched it back, I'm like, okay, maybe it was probably not a bad thing that I missed that, with the exception of the 6 Eddie Guerrero ladder match.
Oh yeah, so that was in Cedar Rapids. Wow, yeah. So then they've really, they ran Cedar Rapids a lot then,
yeah.
And Moline, right? They ran the Mark of the Quad Cities a bunch of times. I know the famous DDP Macho Man Randy Savage was in Moline.
Yeah, yeah, but well, I know at one point, I think it was in Bischoff's book, he had mentioned he knew he could go to a town like Cedar Rapids and Moline and basically sell it out because he knew towns like ours didn't get really a whole lot. So he knew he could bring like a TV taping here and it would sell out like hotcakes. And it was always pretty packed house when WCW came through.
That was
Now,
very smart of him. That's an evergreen strategy. More people running wrestling companies should adopt that philosophy, in my
yeah.
opinion.
For sure, for sure. Now, once you finally kind of got through all your training, how long was it until you officially graduated the class that you had your first big match in front of, a decent sized crowd that you were like, you actually kind of got the jitters for?
Well, I didn't have a match for a year, right? So 1 month into the camp, I broke my floating rib and I didn't drop. I didn't miss a single practice, right? So I broke my rib on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, I was doing CrossFit, crying my eyes out. So I did 2 months of the 3-month camp with a broken rib. And very much in the spirit of DDP and Jerry Wayne back in the day, taping that up, icing it up. I had to do a lot to get through. The main thing I did that got to get through was suffer, a lot of physical suffering. So 2 weeks after I graduated, I was at a seminar for Austin Aries outside Chicago, and my right lung collapsed due to the constant taping. And I had like a 3-part apparatus of tape and ace bandage and a copper fit thing to kind of keep everything in place. Because I was doing that for so long, I was obstructing my breathing, and oxygen got somewhere it wasn't supposed to get. And if that happens, your lung collapses. So the first 2 times they tried to reinflate it, I just went to the ER. They put like a manual pump on my chest, but it wouldn't stay because the lung kept deflating. So I had to, like, few days, like we'll say like 3 or 4 days after it happened, or 2 or 3 days after it happened, I had to go and get emergency surgery, right? So I had to walk myself into the ICU of a hospital in Bettendorf, and they had to perform emergency surgery. And that surgery involved 3 insertions where they put 3 different tubes in through the back to get the lung to reinflate and stay reinflated. And the nature of that surgery created dozens of rib fractures, right? So when I tried to take a bump, like a couple months later, it was pretty intense pain, not right away. It was like one of those delayed onset, intense, crippling pains. And when I asked the doctor about it, he had given me the green light to work out again. But he was very much like, you can't be doing this. If you want to do this, you're going to have to wait months and months. He's like, the minimum number of rib fractures you have is like 48 or 50. So you're going to have to wait for all of that to heal fully before you can bump again, right? So I basically had to not relearn, because you don't forget it mentally, but then I had to essentially retrain my body, reharden my body. So by the time I was able to work and actually safely have a match and bump and all that, so I graduated in March of 2018. So then I started going on the road, I think in January, and had my first match on 3/16 day of 2019 in a battle royal. I got to win my first match, a battle royal outside of Peoria. And then the first match I had that actually made me nervous would have been a main event match kind of near Rockford and Sterling, working with Christian Rose and a few other people in a 6-man tag for Zawa. It was their biggest draw at the time. It was like 230 something people. Dan Severin, they had brought him in for the main event. So we were co-main of their biggest draw. And during our entrance, the bottom rope broke.
Oh no.
And so so that kind of not freaked me out. It worried me, but they needed time. And so I just grabbed the mic and cut a promo. Just out there while they did it, while they got it fixed, waited till I got the sign that they were ready to go. And it's like I was totally not nervous. And then once I handed the mic back, I didn't remember anything we planned at first, right? So that's when I was nervous. It was like I totally blanked on terms of nervousness, grabbed the mic, cut a promo. I'm not going to romanticize it. It was probably nothing within the realm of a special promo, right? But I also wasn't defecating myself and peeing my pants, right? As many independent pro wrestlers will do if you hand them a microphone at any time. So the fact I was able to cut the promo without any nerves was awesome. But then I totally blanked. I was like, oh crap, what was the match? And luckily I was in there with a bunch of performers. Bucky Collins was also in that match, another just worker, great guy. Christian Rose, I don't have enough good things to say about him. What a great dude he was. Connor Hopkins was in the match as well. And everyone kind of helped me get my footing. This is where we're at. This is where we're going. This is what we got to do. I was even able to improvise a bit. But that would be the first match I was nervous for, because once the promoter was like, this is the biggest gate we've ever had by 100. And we're in the co-main event. I was like, whoa, that kind of made me nervous. And then being out there, and then I'm just glad I wasn't starting the match. And I remember being on set and just being out in the corner waiting for a tag and be like, so I kind of blanked. What do we do? And I'm like, because, I don't want to make them look bad, right? I don't want to be the guy who's like, they're relying on me to execute this sequence. And I'm out there making everyone look bad in the semi-main event of their biggest show of all time up to that point. But luckily everything went well. And that's what happens when you work with good people. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of good people. And that night was definitely no exception. But I definitely was nervous for that match for sure.
Do you have any dream opponents? Like anybody that's currently out there that you haven't had a chance to work with yet that you're like, damn, I wish I could really wrestle. I could work with them at some point.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of people. I haven't gotten out on the road very much due to economic limitations, self-imposed. But there's not really just one people, right? I haven't gotten out on the road and put in nearly enough miles, right? I'm not one of those indie wrestlers who considers themselves a chronically slept on martyr. You know what I mean? Like, so there are a lot of people, too many to name. One of my first 20 matches was against Steve Manders, one of my best friends in life,
yes.
not just in wrestling. So I would love to work with him again, since I am, 20 times the performer I was. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, so my first match would have been March of 2019. We had a match in like June or July of 2019, right? So even if I was working every weekend, that's still barely any matches. You know what I mean? Between my debut and then. And he very much had to walk me through it. I wrestled in a top back then, and it was an outdoor show in the summer. I thought I was dying. I think I pretty much said that to him out there. It was so hot and humid. Iowa summer, right?
Yep,
For IPW, right? It was a fair show.
Oh
And
yeah.
I had him in the hold, and I'm like, hey, we got to go home. And he's just like, what? No, we don't. I was like, Steve, I am dying. You either need to rip this shirt off of me, because it wasn't a cotton shirt. It was like one of those polyester compression shirts with my logo on it. So it looked cool, and it's great if you're working indoors, but you cannot work in that shirt outdoors, right? And we did a couple more minutes, and I was like, Steve, I'm dying. We need to go home. So, and it was still fine. I remember everyone was really nice. And I remember asking people a week later, I was like, don't spare my feelings. How bad was the match with Manders? They're like, it wasn't that bad. You're just over dramatizing it, right? But I would like to now, all these years later, have another go at him. But I mean, there's so many Black and Brave grads I'd love to work, and 20 guys coming from Chicago, right? I live in Davenport, Iowa now. I moved here from Chicago. There is just a ton of guys in the Chicago and, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin independent wrestling scene that I would just love to work, right? Too many to name.
Well, now too, with you kind of getting out here into the Central Empire Wrestling scene, which again, the next show for Central Empire Wrestling is next Saturday, May the 4th in Oskaloosa, Iowa. Get your tickets now. Head over to Central Empire Wrestling Facebook page for more information on that. But again, that'll open your eyes and ears to more of the talent that they like to bring in over there. They like to bring in kind of guys from all over. A lot of guys from Black and Brave, as well as and just Madhouse Wrestling has some really great talent that they like to use as well. And it's kind of just a nice mix locker room as you got to experience there at the last show. Now I know this coming weekend, let's talk about a little bit. SCW has a big show coming up here this weekend too.
Yeah, Epic. Their biggest show of the year is Epic every April. right? SCW Pro, running for 20 years and counting now. And I'm going to be in a 4-corner tag team title match, myself and Malik champion. And yeah, so it's this Saturday. It's in Bluegrass, Iowa. Check out, just go to SCW Pro on any social media if you want to get tickets and whatnot. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I started working with Malik Champion and Eric Esnight like a month or two ago now, right? Recently. And love those guys, right? Two of my favorite dudes, two of my favorite graduates. I love whenever they're at the gym, always two of my favorite people to see. So when I was presented with the opportunity to work with them, I was just, I remember saying, I was like, as long as I'm wrestling, I thought maybe they wanted me to come into like a bodyguard role. And they're like, no, we want you to wrestle. I was like, well, if I'm wrestling, I like these guys. And they're both good. So, I mean, that's a no-brainer. You know what I mean? Like their professional quality and their personal integrity are second to none, right? They're very good human beings and they're very good professional wrestlers. And that's the type of people I look for, right? That's the people, those are the type of performers that anyone should want to work with and any wrestling promoter should want to book, right? So very much looking forward to that. I know Eric has a match against Shane Hollister. That will be very good. That's a story they've been telling, for months. I mean, we're in April. I'm pretty sure that's a story they've been telling since the beginning of the year, right? So how many places in independent wrestling are you going to have a 3 or 4 month story, right? Getting told and slowly built up and now climax at the biggest show of the year, right? It's very common. It doesn't mean it's better or worse or right or wrong, but it's very common in most indie shows to just have, they're essentially all spot shows. It's just, here's a bunch of matches, right? Not a lot of story. Here's a bunch of matches.
Yep.
SCW Pro is very much unique in that, I mean, this tag title match that I'm in, I think it's the only match that doesn't have a story. And the only reason it doesn't have a story is because Casey Jax was injured. He, I believe, hurt his foot, his ankle, or his leg, and was unable to wrestle for a while, right? So, but even though the match itself doesn't have a story, myself and Malik have been very much up in the story with him and Shane Hollister. And it's very much been not just Shane Hollister versus Eric Esnight for their match that's going to culminate at Epic. Myself and Malik in singles matches and handicap matches have also been working with him, right? So that has been very fun to be a part of. Anytime I get to work with Shane Hollister, just a privilege. He probably gets tired of me kind of I kind of can fanboy around him sometimes, right? Because remember, the first time I saw AAW Pro with the Black and the Brave and Shane Hollister and them was 2005, right? So Crotch, Merrick Brave, Tyler Black, Knight Wagner, right? Mason Beck, Silas Young, all those guys. Anytime I'm around any of those guys or get to work with them, it's a big privilege. So it was great to be part of Shug's story with Eric, and I'm very much looking forward with Malik to getting those tag titles, right? And everyone who's in that match, I know you got Cash Kennedy and Nico Klein in there, another two of my favorite guys. You got Casey Jax and Tigre Amor, right? I've gotten to work with Tigre before. Looking forward to getting there with him. And then, who's that last team? I feel like that's 1, 2, 3. Oh, and then Thumb and Brewster, who I just love. Man, I've gotten to work with Thumb a bunch. We just always seem to have good matches. We have this chemistry. You never know. You can't predict it. You can't buy it. We just seem to have this chemistry every time we're in the ring together. We click. And then Chuck Brewster, one of my favorite human beings that I've met since I've been in Black and Brave. And I was on the road with him a lot when I first got started too. So, and he is white hot. His reactions, his connection with the crowd is special. So anytime you're in there with someone like that, Shane Hollister, very similar, right? Obviously for different reasons. Brewster's only been around for, a couple of years. Hollister has got decades in there. But anytime you get to work with performers who have this strong emotional connection with the crowd, it's such a special experience. So I am very much looking forward to being a part of that match and just being a part of that show, right? Because SCW tells stories and gets emotional investment from its fans. And those are the best crowds to work in front of, in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, we're kind of doing that similar here with Central Empire Wrestling. And again, Saturday, May the 4th, Central Empire Wrestling. But again, this coming Saturday, SCW Wrestling, Bluegrass, Iowa, at the Bluegrass Community Center. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay, I thought
Yeah, it's a
thought
great
that's what
venue
thought that
too.
was the
Great
usual
venue. Both
venue
of them are.
there.
So both the one in Oskaloosa. Yeah,
So-
it just became like the home venue just like a year ago. They had been running forever near that big truck stop. But yeah, they started in Bluegrass like a year and a half ago, and it's a great venue all around for the performers and the fans. And I love the venue in Oskaloosa too. Great, nice, clean, flat building, well lit, easy to get around. Like it's always as an indie wrestler. And you ask any indie wrestler, we have an appreciation when we get to work in good venues, right? Because part of being an indie wrestler means you don't always work in very good venues.
All right, we got just a few minutes here before the recording here shuts us off. So where can people follow you at, my friend, on social media?
Oh, I'm at Augustus Draven on pretty much everything. Just look up at Augustus Draven, AugustusDraven, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or X, and YouTube. But yeah, Instagram is probably the one I do the most. That's the one I encourage people to at least check out, because the aesthetic of my Instagram will instantly give you an idea of my character, right? Because just the way the grid is presented, right? The grid of images and whatnot, you'll kind of see like, okay, this guy is kind of this kind of darker character, right? As opposed to the clean, sanitary presentation of Facebook and Twitter, right? Instagram, it kind of lends itself more to that visual element. So at least check that out. But at Augustus Draven, find me anywhere. And that's the email to AugustusDraven@outlook.com for email.
And there you have it. And again, check him out at SCW Pro this weekend, and then head on over to Oskaloosa next weekend and catch him out in tag team action there as well. And if we don't see you guys at the show, hopefully we'll check you. You guys will see us here next time, right here on the World Wide Web.